The Jacksonville Jaguars are picking in the top 5 again in the 2025 NFL Draft. So, what will they end up doing with their first pick when it is their time on the clock? My name is Tyler, here with my brother Ryan, and we're going to break down our first 3-round NFL mock draft of the 2025 NFL offseason for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But before we do that, if you want to help the Tracy Take channel grow, easiest way is hitting that subscribe button. And while you're at it, tackle that bell to get notified when videos come out and leave a like and a comment. Let us know what you want to see the Jaguars do with their first pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. And Ryan, with that being said, Jacksonville Jaguars picking fifth, and they end up going with Will Johnson in our mock draft. We did a full 3-round mock draft of all the top 100 picks. And so you can see a couple picks before and after as well, and some other potential options that we think the Jaguars can take here. But Will Johnson is going to be a guy that is going to come in and immediately help out this Jacksonville Jaguars secondary. They were one of the worst just defenses in general in the entire league this past offseason. 32nd in passing yards allowed, 257.35 yards per game as well. And so he's going to be an instant boost to this team just in general. But what's interesting though about this pick, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I don't really think there's a wrong pick, I think, for Jacksonville here. Through just doing more mock drafts and doing more reading, more research, it seems, I don't want to say almost certain, but pretty certain the top 4 picks in some order are going to be Cam Ward, Shador Sanders, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter in some form
Yeah.
or fashion. So Jacksonville's going to have kind of the like the picks of anybody else. So like if they don't want to go with Will Johnson, they could go with another Michigan player and Mason Graham. I think that would be an amazing fit for this defensive line where you got Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen on the other side. There's a lot of
Yeah.
other good players, especially defensive players as well. I think that they can help out, and they also need help on the offensive line. What do you think of Will Johnson and what he can bring here to Jacksonville? And what are some other players you think the Jaguars can target with their first overall pick?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things for me that I think a lot of people underestimate is just how good of and sound of a corner he is in just about every coverage. Like, he is solid in man coverage, he's very sticky, he's very good with zone discipline and zone coverage. Like, he just does a lot of things well, but he's also doing all of that at in a phenomenal frame and with phenomenal athleticism at 6'2", 200, and he's just like a corner built in a lab. And he didn't play very much this year because he had a foot injury at the end of the season, especially after Michigan was not really in contention for a national championship. It sounded kind of like the fact that like he might be ready to come back, but he doesn't want to really like risk anything and just kind of continue to get ready for the NFL. So it does remind me a little bit of like a Nick Bosa situation coming out of Ohio State or a Jamar Chase coming out of LSU, where he didn't play his last year, but the talent was so good on the field the year before where like it doesn't really matter that he didn't play last year. And I think if you're Jacksonville, I think you get a borderline blue chip talent. I think there's some questions surrounding why he didn't play this past season that maybe knocks him down a notch or two. But if he had played at the same level he did this year, he would be in that blue chip category for me. And I think this is just a really good value here. You need the corners down there in Jacksonville. You go get Will Johnson, and that fills that void immediately. And then also too, like if you do want to go another option, I think Mason Graham between Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines Allen would be fantastic. You could go Tet McMillan and pair him up with Brian Thomas Jr. You'd have like the biggest catch radius of any wide receiver group in the league there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think right now there are more prioritizing needs on the team as well. So then Will Campbell, if you want to keep protecting Trevor Lawrence, I think is always a good option. He will be drafted higher just based off of his leadership qualities and mentality than I think people realize. And so I think he could be a potential this could be a potential landing spot for him as well.
Yeah, and I also think too, if you go and look at uh, just the Jags free agents, like Brandon Scherf, he's 34, he's going to be free agent. He was the right guard for Jacksonville, and so do they want to re-sign him? Is he going to retire? Those questions are going to be asked.
Yeah.
And so I think Will Campbell could be another great option here at number 5, and as what you've talked about as well as the leadership quality, also coming with Will Campbell, and so that's why I said like just looking at it, like I don't really think there's a wrong pick here. And there's even some other defensive line guys that I could see even taking like a really big rise. I don't think they would go edge rusher that maybe later on in the class. That might be the one position
Yeah,
that
that they're
they
good.
probably won't go. Like they won't probably go James Pierce Jr., Nick Scorton, Mike Green if he makes that amazing rise, or like a Shamar Stewart. But I could maybe see if they really like what Kenneth Grant brings to the table, as he is a little bit different type of defensive tackle than Mason Graham, or maybe a Tyleek Williams, or some form or fashion, or some other offensive lineman, that I I think all provide really good value. So that's what the Jags, I think, are in a great spot with their first overall pick. And I think the same thing can be said for their second round pick as well. They do have 4 picks in the top 100. And so I'm pretty sure it was thanks to the Minnesota trade for Cam Robinson that they're going to get
Yeah.
an extra third round pick. But they end up going with Josh Conerly here. Personally, if Donovan Jackson makes it one more pick, I think that would be an amazing addition to this team. Even if they end up taking Will Campbell with the 5th overall pick, I think you double
Yeah.
dip and try and protect Trevor Lawrence. But Josh Conerly, still offensive tackle out of Oregon. And correct me if I'm wrong, is he a guy that could potentially kick inside also, or is he going to
He
be a
could.
tackle?
He has the athleticism and the length, I think, to survive out there, but he has had like a sixth offensive lineman kind of outside of him, and he's shown being comfortable in more of a tighter space. The
Yeah,
biggest thing with him is, and he's going to need to do this at tackle anyways, but he's going to come in and he's going to need to add some weight and really kind of develop, I think, a better anchor at the NFL level, and that's going to be his big developmental issue. Is right now we saw Mike Green ran right through
yeah,
his face on that
yeah,
1-on-1 rep. And granted, so that's a 1-on-1 rep. He was playing on the opposite side of what he's used to, and switching sides for tackles is difficult. And so like all of his weaknesses were kind of exacerbated on that one rep. And like it just was a bit of an unfair situation for him, but teams wanted to see him play right tackle as well. But I think his best position is probably left tackle. I do think he could be a really athletic left guard as well, and he could be a solid interior offensive lineman, I think, at the next level as well. I just do think he might be best suited to put on another 5-10 pounds of muscle and then just stay at left tackle. But for what the Jaguars need him, and he, I think, could definitely be one of the best 5 offensive linemen on that team, and find a role. I think going forward on that team in that
yeah.
offensive line room.
Yeah, yeah, and so I thought he had a good Senior Bowl as well. Obviously, everybody knows the Mike Green video. Mike Green remembers it as it's going to make Mike Green a lot of money. But
Yeah,
I still think that he's going to provide a lot of good value and a good developmental piece as well. The one reason for me, I almost wonder. I mean, because they have Walker Little there, but and then they drafted Antoine Harrison as well, and so like I can also see them maybe really prioritizing the interior as well, because that was also a really big
yeah,
issue for the team. But I say that as I'm saying that, it's like I think any offensive line member, I think it's something
yeah,
that would be huge for them here. So moving on now to their the first of their 2 third-round picks. Alfred Collins, defensive tackle out of Texas, finally addressing that defensive line, the trenches on the other side here, getting a big meaty guy to go in between both Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen's as well. Jacksonville, they had one of the worst rush defenses as well. Also, last year they were 25th overall in yards allowed, averaging 132.64 rushing yards allowed per game. And I definitely think this would be a big area of need for this area, as Jeremiah Ledbetter, he's going to be a free agent as well. Devon Hamilton could be absolutely upgraded. Mason Smith was a rookie. Did not have the best rookie year, but I think still just getting good, more young talent in there. And this, I think, would be a good spot, as this is a very deep defensive line class. I will say
mhm,
another guy that I really like here, and I'm biased as if you're watching the channel a lot. I'm also an Indiana Hoosier fan as well, so I'm going to be saying this name as much as I can, especially too in like these day 2 picks. CJ West, right here. Go look him up at Indiana. He was one of the main reasons why we were so good, why the defense was so good this year at Indiana. And I think he would also be a very solid selection here for Jacksonville.
yeah, and that is like Alfred Collins and I think CJ West are very comparable players.
Mhm.
Alfred Collins just did it at a more consistent level, playing against better competition most of the time. They're at Texas, and so if I'm Jacksonville, I might feel a little bit more convinced that Alfred Collins could hold
Yeah.
up strength wise at an NFL level. That being said, CJ West had phenomenal games against Notre Dame and Ohio State, who were the two teams in the national championship. If you're not like if you're living under a rock, but I do think that this is a really good pick here. CJ West would be another one. If they want to go with more of an athletic, like pass rushing defensive tackle, TJ Sanders could be that guy as well. Not going to be nearly as stout against the run, but you think about his athleticism there in between uh, Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker. That could be a real problem for offenses to handle. JJ Pegweiss, the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, is another guy I think that kind of falls in between these two. And if they want to invest in that secondary, Zy Alexander is another good fit as well. So
Yeah.
a lot of good options here. To me, like picks 50 through 120 is going to be like the sweet spot of this draft where you're going to get a lot of really good value players just because after those first four picks, there's not a huge difference between anybody at that point. Like there's so many guys that could be picked in the third round or picked in like around pick 25. And so I feel like you're going to get really good value kind of in this range. And Alfred Collins is definitely one of those guys. So let's move on here to their final pick. And this is another guy that I think is good value. A guy I think that came out a year too early to the NFL draft. That's going to be Isaiah Bond, the wide receiver from Texas there. Christian Kirk like. He's a little bit faster and a little bit smaller, but you talk about real game speed. Isaiah Bond has it. You can just kind of watch, and he makes everybody else look like they're running in slow motion. Has some trouble at times running through zones where that speed is just too much, and he runs through zones too quickly instead of slowing down and allowing the maximum amount of time in those gaps between the zone to be open for quarterbacks. But I think if you can get the ball in his hands in space, he's a real threat there. You go look, Brian Thomas Jr. had a really solid rookie season. They have a few other weapons like Parker Washington, Travis. Who's the running back?
Travis Etienne.
Travis
Yeah.
Etienne and Tank Bigsby are the two running backs there that are really good weapons as well. Like they have a decent supporting cast. I think if you go and now you start adding some strategy pieces to this offense for Liam Cohn to go and kind of maneuver and play with, I think that would be a really good fit.
Yeah, I think this would be a good scenario for Isaiah Bond to come into is because kind of as we were starting doing mock drafts around Thanksgiving time, like everybody was giving him a first round grade, and he's fallen off pretty heavily
Yeah,
up to this point here. And I think if he comes to a situation like Jacksonville where Brian Thomas Jr. is clearly the number one guy. You're going to have a veteran receiver in Gabe Davis. Even then, too, as well, if they keep Christian Kirk, allow him some time to develop. But even the names that you mentioned there, and you have Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne, he definitely won't be the guy. And so I
Mhm.
think he's got a good role player skill set for a solid NFL career. I don't think he's ever going to be the guy for an NFL team, but I think he can be a solid number 2 or number 3 option. And I think that's kind of what Jacksonville is looking for because they found their guy in Brian Thomas Jr.
Oh yeah,
Dude's an absolute stud. So I think this is a pretty good, diverse draft class for Jacksonville. I think they hit a lot of key needs and get a lot of key players that are going to be available. I keep going back and forth on whether or not they should go with Will Johnson or with Will Campbell. Would that fit the overall pick? And I'm almost kind of leaning towards, as of right now, like you go with Will Johnson because he's clearly one of the top 2 corners in the league. While where they're picking at the second round, or even where their picks are at the third round, there are good quality offensive linemen that they can
yeah,
go and draft and bring in. Will Campbell's not a sure thing. Will Johnson's not a sure thing. But there is definitely a big difference between Will Johnson and Trey Amos and Darion Porter, who are going to be second round picks, versus Will Campbell and Donovan Jackson. Like, don't get me wrong, I think Will Campbell's better, but Donovan
yeah.
Jackson got a lot of really good film on tape, and if you can get him there with that second round pick, that's a great value, I think, for this Jacksonville team.
Oh no, 100%. I think that's kind of the strategy there. And there's a big drop off in corner as well, where like even offensive linemen, I think you go look. Who's the kid from Alabama? Uh, Andrew
Tyler
Ty-
Booker.
or Tyler Booker is really good as well. Like there was a lot of good offensive linemen. Anthony Belton had a good uh, Senior Bowl there this past week. And I think just watching this offensive line class, Gray Zabel is another guy that if you could even move back up with your extra pick, like there's so many guys in that like top of the second into the first round that are going to be there for the taking. I think you take the swing on the skill position player and
Yeah.
add that to your group.
Well, and even too as well, we start getting later into day two. Ozzie Trapiu from Boston College. Wyatt Milam's
Yeah.
fallen a little bit, but still could be a great guard
Yeah.
as well. Tyler Booker as well. Marcus Bowe, Charles Grant from William and Mary. Tate Ratledge, Jared Wilson as well, center and guard from Georgia. I think would be solid day two or maybe even early day
Yeah.
three picks. I think Jacksonville can go out and target, and those guys could provide some good minutes. And so that's where I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of interesting options. So it's like, how do they want to navigate this? Is going to be very fascinating on what they want to end up doing there.
And you can even make, to me, the same argument for defensive tackle. I think you go look like Deion Walker, Alfred Collins, CJ West. There's so many guys at that. TJ Sanders, JJ Pigweiss. Like, there's so many guys at that defensive tackle position, especially too. That position typically the value tends to fall. Like Jersey Newton, who we thought was going to be a top half of the first round pick last year, or top 20 pick last year, ends up falling to 34 to the
Yeah.
Commander. And so, like, that is a position where typically value falls and that you can snag that later in the draft, where a high caliber corner like Will Johnson just does not hang around very often. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I think that my pick is going to stick with Will Johnson for now. We'll see how this draft process progresses, but we're both in agreement on that. So let's go ahead. Let's wrap up this video here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. That is the best way to help out the channel. While you're down there, leave a comment on what you want to see the Jacksonville Jaguars do in the 2025 NFL draft. Did you love this? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? Other than that, we will see you guys next time.